All right. So tonight, this is a community chat, and with Kathy and I. And like I said, we're going to talk about restructuring, reorganization for next year. A little bit about the budget, not a ton, because we're just beginning that process, and summer school. The chat did disable the chat for now, partially because um, we're making the presentation, and then if people want to speak or ask questions, we will have a little time for that afterwards. And we did get some questions in the Google form that we posted, so we'll address some of those as well. So topic one, restructuring. So just to give a little historical perspective, since I've been in the district, we have been, it's been talked about restructuring the school district. And so, we've had lots of conversations. When I came here, the assistant principal in 2000, I think it was 2011, we had conversation about that, and basically the need to get all of our students in the same grade levels under one roof. What is going on? There we go. Sorry, my tech skills are not very good. I've made this presentation like 4 times today, so you'd think I'd have it down. And so, we've had a lot of talk. We've got 2 aging buildings that are going to need a ton of work, but we also have our pre-K2 students in 2 different buildings. And, if we're truly going to be an RSU, we'd like to put them together. We've done a fabulous job over the course of, since my time in the district, of really trying to create the same educational experiences for all kids at all grade levels. Reality is, until we get them under one roof, get all of our kindergarten, all of our pre-K, all of our kindergarten, all of our first grade, all of our second grade, it's really hard to create the same experience for them. It's very hard to utilize resources appropriately, to maintain reasonable class sizes between different buildings, and really making sure that kids have the same experiences when they transition buildings. At the end of the day, a lot of you know me, my biggest thing is about making decisions that are best for kids first. And I think reorganizing and restructuring long-term is what's best for kids. Secondly, we've got 2 buildings. To take you back in time, in 2000, when the RSU was formed, and I think it was 2009, there was a lot of talk about, how we could reduce the number of buildings we were in. At that time, we had schools in, we had Wales Central School, Sabattis Primary, the middle school, Carrie Ricker, Libby Tozier, and the high school. When the Wales School was closed, the decision, the conversation started happening where, all right, so now we've closed the Wales School. We're looking at potentially how can we create a continuity of education. At that time, the decision was made to bring everybody to 3rd grade, everybody together at 3rd grade. In 2013, we undertook our first performance contract to do work in the buildings. At that time, I think I was the assistant principal at the high school. The decision was made that we would not do any work at Libby Tozier and Sabattis Primary, A, because of the volume of work that needed to be done, and B, there had been a strong push to get us in 3 buildings. So put pre-K 12 into 3 buildings. And the conversation at that time was, in 3 years would restructure. Well, we're 8 years later and we're still in those buildings. In the last year and a half, we undertook our second performance contract. When we did that, we took a hard look at the volume of work that needed to happen at Libby Tozier and Sabattis Primary, and it totaled between $7 and $8 million between the 2 buildings. Those are older buildings. Not a ton of work has been done. I know there's been some frustration as of late. We've lost the heat quite a few times at Libby Tozier. The other thing that we looked at was operational costs of those 2 buildings. So the operational costs, meaning fuel, heating the buildings, electricity, things like that, the space, the work inside, just upkeep. We spend roughly about $500,000 a year on those costs. So you put that all together, and it really comes down to, we needed to, and the board has really been pushing to restructure and get us into 3 buildings. Obviously, I think some of the we've been running a principal back and forth between Libby Tozier and Sabattis Primary. That in my time in the district, we had gone through 5 different principals for those 2 buildings. That's a lot. It was a big job. Kathy held that job for a while. And so, recently over the last year and a half, we have restructured, but we're still running administrators back and forth between 2 buildings. That's not ideal. It's not ideal for our kids. It's certainly not ideal for our staff. The other thing that we want to do is reducing the number of transfers among buildings for students, so that they can get the programming that they need. A lot of times we're constantly trying to figure out, okay, this year we've got 3 kindergartens at Sabattis Primary, or 4 and 2 at Libby Tozier. And I think some of you may remember a few years ago, we had class sizes at Sabattis Primary and kindergarten that were 23, 24, where they were 13, 14 at Libby Tozier. Well, the next year that flip-flopped. And so, we're always trying to move staff back and forth between buildings to keep our class sizes relatively equitable, but it's really hard when you have 2 buildings. The other thing is for our specialized programming is all housed in 1 building. So students that need that specialized programming have to get, bussed over, where this way we could create the specialized programming inside our buildings. So ultimately, we've been looking at this for quite some time. And I think, unfortunately, this timing happened with the pandemic, but I think right now it makes most sense to start this process. So what does that mean? So, we had a lot of conversation at the board level, the Finance and Facilities Committee, about what it would look like to restructure. So the decision was made. We presented a few different restructuring plans. At the end of the day, the board directed me to put out an RFQ, which is a request for qualification, for architects to add an addition to Oak Hill Middle School. In doing this started the process of closing both Libby Tozier and Sabattis Primary schools. And like I touched on, there are high maintenance costs to keeping those buildings open. And so we will start working through the school closure process in this spring. And just briefly, talking about the middle school. So why the middle school? First of all, it's our newest building. It was a state-funded construction project. It's in fabulous shape. We just, as I said, undertook our 2nd performance contract. When the building was built, it was built with the intention of closing Sabattis Primary and building an addition at the middle school. So the utilities were all run to the exterior of the building so that an addition could be put on. One of the biggest things for me and for us as an administrative team and for the board was its access to public utilities. So, Sabattis, the middle school has city water, city sewer, and can handle taking on extra students, where, our other buildings, Carrie Ricker's a fabulous building, but it does not have city utilities. And the high school now has city water. Thank goodness. We were able to complete that project this summer, but it still does not have city sewer. So ultimately, having access to those public utilities so that we don't have to worry about a well going dry or losing a septic system, things like that was a big key for us. The other thing is looking at how we could create 2 schools in 1, and the middle school just seemed to make the most sense. So what does that mean? That would mean that Libby Tozier and Sabattis Primary would close. So I'd take a moment just to talk about the school closure process. So the school closure process kind of works like this. The board would take a vote to close the buildings. They take an individual vote on each building. Once that happens, and I think those of you that went through the Wales closure process probably know this as well. Once that happens, I would file what's called a lack of need report with the state. The state would come back with a dollar figure to keep those buildings open. We would then go to referendum to determine whether or not the communities wanted to close those buildings, the communities in which they're in. If they vote to close them, the schools can then close. If they don't close, and those communities are then responsible for that dollar figure that the state gives us as part of that lack of need report. So then, once that happens, we would then go to referendum for a bond to start construction. So the bond process is we use the main bond bank. We would go out to the voters and ask for permit. The board would vote, we'd then go to referendum, and we'd ask for permission to take out a bond to build an addition at the middle school. So what would that mean? That would mean this. Carey Ricker School would become a pre-K building with approximately 400 students in it. Oak Hill Middle School, and I want to preface this with, we actually have had a lot of conversation. I know there'll be some angst, and we did get a couple questions about it, about having third graders in the same building as eighth graders. One of the things that we want to do as part of this process is really kind of build two schools there. The addition would be its own school. I share that concern. I have kids myself. Although I will tell you that in districts that do one bus run, this isn't uncommon, but it is uncommon for us. And so we'd want to build two schools within one. And then Oak Hill High School would remain basically unchanged. It would house grades 9 through 12, and it would be approximately 400 students there. We're running right around 370 or so right now. We did look at the potential of putting an addition at the middle school, but with the amount of athletic fields that we have there, our space is pretty limited, and without city sewer at this point, it wouldn't have been a good situation potentially. So topic 2 is reorganization. So I'll turn this over to Kathy.
So through the pandemic, we have definitely looked at how we can support our learners in many different ways. We have done hybrid model, we've done fully remote. And when we started to look at some of our pandemic positives, we've noticed that one of the biggest perks has been our small class sizes. When our kids are in our own classrooms. And so we started to look at what are some other pandemic positives that we have as we're looking at the restructuring, how could we work back to make these transitions a little easier as we go through. As Andy had alluded to, there are some transitions that we certainly need to limit our class sizes to get our students under the same roof so we can provide the same educational opportunities and give better opportunities for better programming, as well as providing our staff with similar PD when they're under the same roof. So, we started to talk, probably the beginning of the fall to think about how could we best support and utilize our resources as we're looking at the social, emotional, and academic needs to meet kids where their readiness level is and to move them forward. So as we have presented at the board, Andy, can you go to the next slide?
Yep.
Thank you. We're proposing that Libby Tozier School be a pre-KK school that will hold about approximately 200 students, which it currently does now. The question always is why pre-KK there? So we cannot have kindergarten and pre-K kids on a second floor under fire codes. So Libby Tozier becomes a nice building for our pre-KK students. This has a lot of benefits for our pre-K program. So we are capped at servicing about 90 students, but there have been times where one program in one town will have a wait list, or we end up transporting kids from one town to the other to get to the other program in the other town. This will make the class sizes a little bit more equitable and provide all our students that want to access our pre-K program the ability to do so. We are proposing now Sabatis Primary be grades 1 and 2, approximately 200 students, which is about what we've been averaging over the last couple of years. And Carey Ricker would be 3-4, approximately 200 students. And we'd be suggesting that 5th grade move up to the middle school to create 2 teams. We would create a 5th and 6th grade team and a 7th and 8th grade team. And ultimately, we're looking to have some benefits of educational opportunities. We've noticed some gaps in our data between the transition of 5th and 6th grade, and we want to help close that gap, as well as we wanted to make sure that our teams are even so that the middle school has 2 equal teams. And as Andy talked about in the first restructuring in the reorganization that the board voted on, the 912 does not have any changes. So there's no current change to this model as well. So ultimately, we're moving 4 classrooms from Libby Tozier to Sabattis Primary. Sabattis Primary moving 4 classrooms to Libby Tozier. Carrie Ricker has no changes. The 5th grade would be moving up to the middle school. So that's kind of like what our work would be over the summer. And the big question is, why now? So if we were to look at where we are at with our pandemic, we typically have 2nd graders transition and go to a new building. We typically have 5th graders transitioning to a new building, and we typically have 8th graders going to a new building. That's about 300 students that normally would transition in a summer to a new building. If we add our cohort D students who are fully remote, we have about 180 students. So we can now think about what's closer to about 500 students. In addition, we've had some homeschool students. We have about 125. We suspect about maybe 70 will come back to us. So we're close to about 600 students that are not tied to the building that they would be going to, that they would already have to transition to a new building. That's almost half of our district that would be transitioning to a new building. And so when we're looking at our kids are tied to people, they're not tied to buildings. And for like our cohort D kids, they're tied to the person that's on the screen, just like you're seeing me right now. And so for us, we thought this was the time. And I know it feels like another upheaval, but for when kids are tied to teachers, and our teachers are not going anywhere, our teachers are still going to be teaching, and they're still going to be in their grade levels, and are still going to be in our buildings. It just may not be in the exact building that they were last year. So the why is, this is a good transition because our kids are already transitioning. And so for half of them, it would be a normal transition anyway. They wouldn't know of the wiser. There are a lot of proposals that we presented at the board level. Again, flexibility in student placement. This allows us to have programs that are matching the students' readiness levels. We have, as kind of Andy alluded to, we've had a variance in our numbers in our pre-K2, where some classes have this massive bubble, and then there's the next year is a reduction in one building, but it sees an increase in the other. This allows us to place our classes or our students or our transfers, as we have many kids coming back to us, just a little bit more flexibility, as opposed to divvying up kids between 2 classes, they're divvying up between 5. Makes a big difference. Our class sizes we're predicting will be between 15 and 20 versus 20 to 25. Obviously, there is a benefit for our, whoa.
All right.
That's okay. Benefit for our staff of having similar PD and having an entire grade level in one building. More balanced classrooms, so including our special ed population. So at Carrie Ricker, for example, we've had an open position, and we've looked at different programming. It's been inconsistent between pre-K2, so we're actually going to have more consistent programming for our special ed population. I know I met with Nancy, our special ed director, and we looked at making sure all our staff are in the right place, and all the way down to the kid level and what the kids need. And we can actually provide better services for our students more consistently in every building. So we're excited about that. And we are looking to, we currently have an essentials class at Libby Tozier at 2nd grade. We also have an essentials classes at 9 through 12. And we have dabbled with essentials programming at the middle school. With this, we would be able to provide an essentials class from K through 12. Essentials class typically is about half, it's a smaller class size, and it's for, usually it compromises about half special ed, half regular ed kids. But it's really about giving kids an opportunity to get some foundational knowledge if they're a little bit behind, to kind of catch them up quickly to the grade level that they're placed at. It gets our staff ready for the transition that Andy alluded to in phase 2. And there's no additional cost to the RSU except for a few stipends for our staff that moves. With any change, there's certainly some cons. Our administrative teams would be working on different grade spans, so we would still keep our administrative teams per per town. But for example, Jamie, instead of doing pre-K2 and 3 through 5, she now would be pre-KK and 3-4. So she would be responsible for different grade spans. Obviously, we're starting this process with parents and students because they'll be going to different buildings. We typically have transitional plans of getting kids ready to move to the other buildings. We're going to have to be really creative in a COVID world on what those transitions will look like. And, you know, for example, some students will have more transitions than others. For example, first graders at Libby Tozier would go to second grade for SPS next year, and then third grade at Carey Ricker. But they're also moving with staff around them that they're used to. They're going to still see their first grade teachers, and they'll still see some of those second grade Libby Tozier teachers at SPS. So some of those transitions they'll be doing together. So we'll be really creative about what that will look like, and we'll have transition plans through the spring, just like we will in other grade levels. Phase 2 we talked about, as Andy alluded to. So these would be kind of what the overall bird's eye view would be, is closing those 2 schools. We would then just have to move a few grade levels. So pre-K2 would go to Carey Ricker, 3rd and 4th would move to the middle school.
I think it's important to note too, and I talked about this at the board, you know, an interim move. I think, you know, there's been some question about that, but for me, you know, I've watched other restructures happen in other districts. And when you not only are moving into a brand new building, but you're also moving in and working with new people, it tends to be a struggle. It just does. And this way, in an interim move with phase 1, we get all our grade levels working together so that when we go to 3 buildings, the staff have all worked together already. And they can support kids even better than trying to learn each other and moving to a building at the same time. So I'm going to switch gears just for a second. I want to make it really clear today. You know, we made this presentation quite a few times today. You know, this topic is not really tied to the other 2 topics. It's more just talking about we are getting ready to, you know, go through the upcoming budget season. One of the things that I think has been really good, you know, Kathy talks about pandemic perks, is the ability to do board meetings virtually. And actually, the governor has extended that. That will continue for 30 days after any extension of the state of emergency. There's also a bill in the legislature to continue that, allow school boards and municipal boards to continue that process. I support it. Like I said earlier, I think we've had more participation in our meetings, public participation, than we've had in my entire time and in this school district. And I spent some time on a school board and where I live, and we never had participation from the public. So it's been a good thing. So, you know, I wanted you all to know we are going to be going through the budget process. I will be making a presentation on the first draft of the budget, probably the first meeting in March. And I think it's important that you all know that that's going to happen. I think you hear this, revenues are down across the state. We are looking at probably our toughest budget season ever, but we're going to roll up our sleeves. My biggest goal is to keep the programming that we have in place for our students. We do a fantastic job. One of the things, you know, I like to talk about, and I think, you know, I don't think you may have heard it from the auditor in the fall. We run about 99.8% efficient with our school budget. So, and what that means is, you know, there are a lot of places that run 96, 97%, where they don't expend every year about 3% of their budget. We run a very tight budget. Like I said, we don't have millions of dollars that are left over every year because there's no padding of the budget. There's no contingency lines or anything like that. So I say this all the time. Our educators do a fabulous job with what they have. We recognize that we are a 20, I say it like this, but we're a almost $20 million business that makes no money. Our product is kids, and we do that on the backs of our property taxpayers. And so I'm really cognizant of that fact. So I encourage you all to start attending board meetings to hear the discussion surrounding the budget. It's going to be a different year again with regards to budget. So through an update of an executive order, the governor has given permission to not hold a district budget meeting again. So the board will be talking about that, how they want to address that. We'll offer up opportunity for feedback. But I just think it's important to know that that conversation is coming, and I encourage you all to get involved. I think probably most people on here are parents that have kids in our buildings, and I think it's important that you know what we're talking about with regards to the budget. So lastly, summer school.
So that was a question that has come up at the board level, as well as parents have asked as well. So we are going to use some of our ESSER funds, which is part of the COVID money. It's a grant. And we are going to use some of those funds to create a summer school. In the past, we've had summer school for 6 through 12 and extended school year services for special ed students in pre-K 12 or K-12. So we are going to be looking at providing some sort of summer school. What it looks like in the details, we'll know more. We're still kind of building it right now and we're hoping to offer it for pre-K 12 this summer. We need to look at what our staffing capacity would be, and also what the COVID regulations will be. It would be in-person summer school. And we will provide more details later spring about options to sign your child up if you are interested.
I think it's important. My hope is that we can come back to school in the fall, like we normally come back to school in the fall. That's my hope. I don't know what that's going to look like. I can tell you the superintendent organizations have been pushing the Department of Education really hard to not give us a plan in the middle of August, to give us something earlier so we can plan for whatever that's going to look like. I do know that there is a meeting happening this week between DHHS, the CDC, the Department of Ed, and looking at the framework for schools. Those are those six items that we must do right now during the pandemic. So the wearing of masks, the social distancing, those things. I don't know if there are any changes that are going to come out of that. I do know that recently the governor extended the ability for businesses to stay open past 9, which tells me the metrics are getting better. So, I don't know. My hope is that we can come back in full time, but bigger than that, I hope we get some better information from Augusta beforehand. So that concludes our presentation. I will, at this point, open it up for questions, and I would ask that you raise your hand to do that. We've got, we do have some questions that came in on the Google form. So if you want to raise your hand to ask questions, please do. No? Okay. I'll take a couple while we wait here from the Google form.
A lot of them are about busing there, Andy. So maybe we can just address busing that. Will there be a difference in busing? I know for the middle school, like for 5-8, Glenn, our director of transportation, talked about the transfer would be at the middle school, not at the high school. But the busing for pre-K 4 would be the same. It wouldn't extend time or anything.
Yeah, nothing would change there. I think there were some questions about, a lot of the questions with busing surrounded when we actually fully restructure, and putting pre-K on the same bus as a high school student. So I will tell you, in other districts, there is, they do run one bus run. I happen to like one bus run. We don't have that infrastructure at this point. We would continue to run 2 bus runs when that happens into the future. That wouldn't change much. There was a question regarding, what the 3 through 8 would look like. And I think I talked about that. I want to create 2 separate schools within that one building. I think that's important. They'd have staggered start times, staggered end times. And really, we're looking at an addition now that potentially has a small gym, its own art room, its own music room, its own cafeteria, things like that, so that we can keep those 2 buildings, those grade levels more separated. So Tiffany's got a question.
Hi. When we're talking about moving 5th grade up to the middle school next year, I have a kid in middle school right now, and I don't see where those students and classes are going to fit with the existing building. So what are your thoughts on not only fitting them, but also keeping those middle school class sizes from ballooning up in the interim?
Yep. So Kathy and I can both talk about this, but one of the things when moving those students up, we would bring fifth grade teachers with them, so the class sizes wouldn't change as far as 6, 7, and 8 are concerned. The middle school has had the room to take on a grade level. When the middle school was built, it was actually built for 400 students. We walked the building, we looked at rooms, we placed them on charts. So there is room there. Ultimately, one of the reasons we couldn't move any more grade levels at this time because we needed the addition. But Kath, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit too.
No, I think it's when you have empty rooms, you spread out your wings, and so we do have some programs that are actually in 3 different rooms currently. So it's just about making sure we're repurposing our rooms and our people and getting our staff where they need to be. So we're okay. We've already outlined it all.
Yeah. Erica.
Hi, thanks you guys for doing this also. I was wondering, could you elaborate on the buildings if they decide to close the buildings, do the towns take over the buildings?
Yeah, they can. Yeah, they can. And so, I've had conversation with both towns. I actually meet with, I meet with Wales selectmen quite frequently. I meet with the town manager, Tony Ward, in Sabattis once a month. And I meet with Kelly Weisenfels in Litchfield once a month, and had conversation with them that they are interested in looking in at those buildings. But yes, they would have the opportunity to take those buildings over for sure.
Yeah, we were just wondering because from a rec stand point.
Absolutely.
Accessing the fields or that sort of thing for the buildings. So.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a lot of the talk. I know that, for instance, Kelly and I were talking about recently in Litchfield, they've had a lot of conversation about building a new town office because they've outgrown it. And there's a big difference between the work that needs to be done in a building to house 200 students and the work that's needed to be done to house a town office. So they've had a lot of conversation about that. The same thing, I think both towns have really kind of outgrown their town offices. And so they'd be interested, but certainly, the towns would have the opportunity to take those buildings back over.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, no problem. Who else? I'm going to go back to the Google form. What's that?
Dottie has her hand.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I just was curious, aren't there more than 4 first and second grade classes in Litchfield now? Because you had talked about moving 4 classes, but there's more than that now.
Yeah, so we actually only need to move because there already are some at Sabattis or there are already some at Libby Tozier. So we only have to, so at Libby Tozier, there are 2 first grade and some second grade. We would just have to only move so many classes to make the right amount for each building. So we actually don't need to move kid furniture really. A little bit of pre-K and kindergarten because their tables are very tiny. But in terms of like desk at second grade level, we don't need to move the desk. We're just moving teacher libraries and the teacher materials. So when I say moving, it's just because we're just actually moving the teachers themselves.
Okay, I just wondered what happens to those other teachers. Like, is this...
No, we have the right amount of teachers when we do the moves. And, we met with the teachers today to kind of talk about what, what grade level they want to teach as like a first, second, and third choice. We're not getting through this restructuring and reorganization. We're not necessarily getting rid of staff here. This is not the point of this. But yeah, we just have to move the feet and get them to the right building.
Okay.
I have a question about the busing again. I'm going to have a
Sure.
son who's in we live in Sabattis, and he'll be going to pre-K when it's all in Carey Ricker. Can you talk about the bus times a little bit in the afternoon? Because I know my daughter, when she was at Carey Ricker, to get back home was like an hour bus ride in the afternoon by the time she got home. And I just worry about that with the younger kids.
Sure, and Shelby, we're doing some of that now. We actually, 2 of our 3 pre-Ks are already in Litchfield. And so, yeah, we have some bus runs that are they are, there's no doubt. When we go to 3 buildings though, our bus runs should get a little shorter. Because we won't be transitioning to different, making different stops through stopping at 5 buildings, right? So they should get a little shorter. The reality is we ended up cutting 3 bus runs 2012, and that did lengthen our bus runs out. We had to add transfer buses, things like that. So through this restructuring, I can tell you, Glenn and his transportation staff have done a fabulous job at looking at our routes. We're actually going to be bringing in the TransFinder program to reroute some of our routes. So TransFinder is a program the state offers, and they will actually put together your routes for you. Our bus drivers are awesome, right? I mean, we have the best bus driver. I say that all the time. I worry that some of them will retire someday because they are that good. And bus drivers are hard to come by. They've done a fabulous job with building our routes, because they do. We're going to bring in this other program too as an aside to see if there are some places maybe we have missed, to get as efficient as possible. Having 4 kids myself, I don't want them on the bus any more than we have to. I think it's good to know this. On a typical day in RSU4, our buses travel anywhere from 13 to 1,500 miles a day. It's a lot of travel. So I hear you. We're going to do everything we can to reduce to keep those times just as low as possible. But unfortunately, due to geography, it's just difficult sometimes.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. What else? Did I miss anything on the form, Kathy?
No, I was just perusing through. It feels the only one that was, I heard concerns about high school in terms of water, heat, et cetera. What's the long term for that building?
Yeah, let's talk about the high school for a minute. So through 2 different performance contracts and a school revolving renovation fund loan, we put a lot of money into the high school. So first of all, water. This summer, we actually got city water hooked up to the high school. So water is not an issue anymore at Oak Hill High School. The wells are only there. We have a couple of wells running to water fields, and that's it. So, continuous water. We did have a situation where we had a pipe burst over the weekend, this weekend, and quite a bit of water got into the building. I said it, that was kind of a byproduct of the cold weather. The pipes actually froze and burst. Had we been on the old well, we would have run out of water. So we would, it's kind of a catch-22. We would have run out of water because the pumps would have shut off. But with city water, it just kept running and running and running. So we got that all cleaned up. But water is not an issue. Heat, in 2013, we put brand new boilers in that building. Those boilers are big Badaris boilers. They are super efficient. They heat the building really well. And Oak Hill High School has a brand new roof. We've replaced all the univents. We've done a lot of work in that building to make it viable for the next 30 or 40 years. I think it's important to note the roof project alone was $1 million, but 670 or 630,000 of it was paid by the state. Because we got a revolving renovation grant, and we will be finishing. There was one section of roof we didn't do over the guidance wing. We'll be finishing that this spring. So we've put a lot of money into the high school to make it viable for the next 30 years. It's in the best shape it's ever been in. I worked in the building in the early 2000s, and I would tell you it was in good shape then. It's in even better shape now. So we've done a ton of that work of things that we're concerned, certainly.
Can I ask one more question?
Oh, sure.
Because I have children that play sports and they're in my ear bugging me. They're curious about whereabouts the addition's going to go on the middle school and if that's going to affect any of the fields that are there.
So the middle school was built, and I think that's why we have to bring the architect in, because if it affects the fields, we'll have to move some of those around a little bit. We don't want to lose fields. We're already short fields to some degree. I mean, we had played field hockey for quite a few years. We played high school field hockey at Carey Ricker. We brought that back to the high school this year, but we had to kind of put in an interim field in between. So I don't want to lose fields, and that's one of the reasons why you hire the state. I mean, I'm a big fan, and Robbie Gayton and I have talked about this, about design build. The state doesn't allow you to do a design build. They make you hire an architect to do these projects. So as part of that, we'll actually be looking at, where the fields are, parking, all that kind of stuff. I don't want to lose fields for this community, for sure.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome. All right. Anything else on the list, Kathy? I think we got them all.
I think we did, yes.
Okay. Well, certainly, I really like doing these. I'm really glad, we've got 48, 50 people on here. I think it's awesome. We are recording this. Certainly, if you have more questions, if you want to call or you want to email, please do. I think it's important. I know that this is a lot to take in. Ultimately, we want to answer your questions as best we can. We got one more hand. Go ahead.
Hello, I just have a quick question. Oh, I don't know if it, sorry.
Go ahead.
Is cohort D going to be an option for next year? And also for people that have multiple children that are going to be at a bunch of different schools now, start time, end time, is it going to be staggered so that we're going to be able to make it to Litchfield and then back to SBS?
Yeah, and sure. Great question. So cohort D, I mean, my hope is that we can come back to normal in the fall. And, we've all offered cohort D this spring because of the pandemic. If we're back in full, I don't believe cohort D will exist, but I just don't know right now. As far as start time, end times, yeah, they're currently staggered. They have to be for buses. As far as, middle school, high school will have its same start time. Pre-K 4 will have its same start time. So we'll have those a little staggered throughout the district just because of, distance between buildings for sure.
Yeah, so for planning purposes, whatever the current start time pre-COVID, right? Because we're kind of in a shorter time frame for this year, but whatever the start and end times were last year for each building would be what we would go forward. And
Thank you.
Fifth grade would be the middle school start and end time.
You're welcome. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you all very much. Like I said, this has been recorded. We're going to post it up. If you go to our website, there are two new portions of our website. There's actually a restructuring web page on our website, and there's also a budget page on our website. So anything we talk about with budget will be posted there. Any presentation we make or documents or information will be posted on. For restructuring and reorganization will be posted on that webpage, and we'll link them all to social media so that you can click on our Facebook and get right there. So certainly, if you have questions moving forward, please ask them. We're here. We like talking to people for sure. I think Kathy knows, you give me a microphone, it's probably a dangerous thing. So thank you all for your time tonight, and certainly try to stay warm.